The October wind rolled over the quiet hills of Lexington, Kentucky, bending the tall grass like prayer. Inside a modest two-story farmhouse, James Whitlow sat on the edge of his son's empty bed, fingers tracing the frayed stitching of a race car blanket. The silence of the room echoed louder than the scream he never allowed himself to release. 2 months had passed since she left. 2 months since the custody papers arrived in a beige envelope, unsigned and cold. 2 months since his 5-year-old son, Owen, climbed into the back seat of her car, waving goodbye through a fogged-up window, unaware it was a final farewell. James hadn't been a perfect husband. He knew that. Long work hours at the auto shop, late dinners, missed anniversaries, but he was always home to tuck Owen in. He remembered the way Owen clutched his hand every time they walked through the farmer's market, or how he called Daddy, look, every time he built a new Lego fortress. But those memories were now fragments in a shattered frame, sitting, face down on the floor of the guest bedroom, the one he never had time to clean after she packed everything. Claire had been everything he thought he wanted, bright, elegant, fiercely intelligent. They met at a car show in Louisville, of all places. He was under the hood of a '69 Camaro. She was writing a piece on vintage Americana for a small arts magazine. He still remembered the way she'd looked at the engine, like it was an old painting trying to whisper a secret. But over time, secrets became silence. Affection dried up, replaced by sighs and subtle slams of cabinet doors. Conversations turned into arguments, and arguments turned into days without speaking. Still, James had always thought they'd pull through, for Owen's sake, for the family, until the divorce hit like a sledgehammer through drywall. She didn't want mediation. She wanted full custody. No shared holidays, no alternate weekends, just a clean break. Her words, not his. She accused him of being emotionally distant, of neglecting her needs, of being married to the shop. In court, her voice trembled with convincing grief, and her lawyer painted James as a blue-collar cliché, overworked, unfeeling, probably too rough around the edges to raise a sensitive child like Owen. James had no words, only the truth. But the truth, it turned out, wasn't loud enough. The judge ruled in her favor. She took Owen, moved across state lines, supposedly to restart in a quieter part of North Carolina. She never left an address, never answered his calls. The one time he tried to visit, a restraining order landed on his doorstep like a winter curse. He still didn't know what she told Owen. Maybe that he didn't care. Maybe that he disappeared. Maybe nothing at all. But James stayed. He stayed in the same town where everyone knew what had happened, but avoided eye contact at the gas station. He kept fixing engines at the garage, though now he worked in silence. No radio, no humming, no jokes. What made it worse was the contrast. Every morning his neighbor across the fence, Greg, played catch with his teenage son before school. The IDG boy's laughter, the thud of the glove. It tore into James like rusted barbed wire. He didn't envy Greg. He just missed the sound. One night, after drinking 2 more beers than usual, James took Owen's last drawing, a crayon spaceship scribbled on the back of a receipt, and pinned it to the fridge. He stared at it, eyes wet but unblinking. That spaceship was all he had left. Yet in that moment he felt something strange, not peace, not hope, but resolve. He would keep living, quietly, honestly. He would remain in the same house, keep Owen's room clean, and keep sending birthday cards, even if they were returned. He would not let bitterness rot his heart, because one day, even if Owen never came back, James wanted his son to know, I never stopped trying, not once. The days blurred into one another like oil on a windshield. By late November, Lexington had begun its slow fade into winter. Mornings came heavy with fog, and the nights dropped early like a curtain. James found a rhythm in the quiet, not peace, not healing, but a kind of mechanical forward motion. Wake, work, eat, stare, sleep, repeat. On Sundays he drove out to an old overlook on a ridge just past Ironworks Pike. It was where he'd once taken Claire during their first year together, before the bitterness, before the custody hearings, before Owen. Now he went alone, bringing a folding chair and a thermos of coffee, watching the valley roll out like a painting he didn't belong in. He brought a notebook too. At first he only scribbled nonsense. Lists, to-dos, sometimes just words. Then, little by little, they became letters. Letters to Owen. He never planned to send them. Didn't even know where to. But he wrote them anyway. Your favorite. Dinosaur is still taped to the fridge. Triceratops. You insisted it was stronger than a T-Rex, and honestly, you might have been right. Your old red rain boots are still on the porch. They've got spider webs now. I never had the heart to. Move them. In town, he kept his head down. The local grocery store clerk stopped asking how he was. The owner of the diner where Claire used to work no longer nodded at him when he came in. People weren't cruel, just quiet. And that quiet was louder than any insult. His friend Marcus, who ran the tire shop 2 blocks down, was the only one who still checked in. He'd swing by James's garage some evenings with takeout and 2 bottles of cheap beer. They didn't talk much, but when they did, Marcus never tiptoed. You ever think about moving on? He asked one night, picking sesame chicken from a paper carton. James looked up from the carburetor he'd been rebuilding for the 3rd time in a week. From what? The house, the town, the pain. From her, from in the stuck part. James stared at the old Harley-Davidson poster on the wall, the one Owen used to point at and ask, "Can we ride that someday?" "I'm not stuck, Marcus," he said, almost whispering. "I'm rooted." And that was the truth of it. James didn't stay because he thought Claire would come back. He stayed because he couldn't leave Owen behind, not in memory, not in the room still perfectly arranged, not in the town that still echoed with his son's laughter. He kept writing, he kept fixing engines, and once in a while he imagined hearing Owen's small feet padding across the hallway. Those imaginary sounds hurt less than the silence. Winter rolled in sharp that year. By mid-December, snow lined the roofs and shoulders of the highway, turning the town into a silent postcard. James's world shrank further into the warm glow of the garage, the only place where movement still made sense. Then on a Monday morning right before Christmas, something shifted. A letter arrived. It wasn't from Claire. It wasn't from Owen. It was from her lawyer. James held the envelope with shaking hands, the courthouse seal catching the weak sunlight. He didn't open it right away. He sat on the porch, coffee forgotten beside him, watching the snow melt slowly off the edge of the roof. He had to read it 4 times before the meaning set in. Claire wanted to terminate parental rights. No visits, no letters, no future contact, no fatherhood. There was no explanation attached, just a line from her attorney citing emotional and psychological harm due to unresolved instability. James laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was such a sterile way to destroy someone. He didn't fight it, not this time. Not after 2 years of ignored birthday cards, blocked numbers, and rejected mediation offers. He called his own lawyer, told her to let it go. He signed the papers. 3 days before Christmas, the last thread between him and his son was legally cut. That night James didn't go to the Ridge. He didn't write in the notebook. He sat in Owen's room, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the ceiling in the dark. And for the first time in months, he cried, not the quiet kind of crying that comes with loss, but the deep, shaking kind that empties you out, the kind that leaves you quiet, not because you're okay, but because there's nothing left to say. Then, something happened. The next morning, James got up, he brewed coffee, he showered, he changed the oil in Mrs. Fletcher's Buick, he even whistled once, surprised himself with it. That night he took down the spaceship drawing from the fridge, laminated it and framed it. That drawing would never leave his wall again, because James finally understood something. He could lose fatherhood on paper, he could lose shared memories, but he would not lose the part of himself that had learned to love without expectation. He would live with a clear conscience. He would not become bitter. He would not let grief steal the best parts of him. New Year's Eve passed with little fanfare in the small Kentucky town. Fireworks cracked in the distance, faint echoes over frost-covered fields. From his front porch, James watched them flicker behind the silhouettes of barns and pine trees, then disappear without a trace. No celebration, no champagne, just a warm flannel, a chipped mug of coffee, and the frame, holding Owen's drawing resting beside him on the steps. By mid-January, the garage picked up business again. Flat tires, frozen locks, busted starters. Winter brought its own kind of chaos. The busier the shop got, the less room there was for silence. That helped. Somewhat. On Thursdays, he started, volunteering at the local high school's auto club. The teacher, Mrs. Redding, had heard about what happened and asked if he'd be willing to show the students some real-world hands-on work. At first, it felt like charity, a distraction for sympathy's sake. But standing beside those awkward teens, watching them fumble with wrenches and proudly misidentify spark plugs, brought something back he hadn't felt in months: purpose. One of the students, a lanky, buzz-cut senior named Dev, took to the work fast. Dev reminded James of Owen, not in looks but in the way he asked questions without shame and found joy in the sound of a working engine. "You always this patient?" Dev asked during their third session, knuckles scraped from a stubborn valve. James shrugged, wiping grease from his hands. "You learn patience when you've lost enough." Dev didn't ask what that meant, just nodded, and they went back to work. Spring crept in slowly, dragging muddy boots behind it. The grass turned soft again. Rain tapped at windows in rhythm. Robins returned to the fence posts. James, now back to planting tomatoes in the small patch behind the house, found peace in small acts. Watering before dawn, checking for worms, adjusting the chicken wire. He wasn't healing in any dramatic way. No grand gestures, no self-discovery. Epiphanies. Just movement. Quiet, steady movement forward. The letters in the notebook kept coming, but now they sounded different. "There's this kid named Dev. He asks the same kind of questions you used to when we built your toy car ramp. I think you'd like him. I planted tomatoes again. You used to complain they were too squishy. I hated how right you were." Still, some nights were harder than others. April 3rd marked Owen's birthday. James baked a small cake himself, chocolate with blue icing just like the last one they shared. He placed 5 candles on top, even though Owen would have been 7. The cake stayed untouched, sitting in the center of the table as the house fell quiet again. Mid-May brought blooming dogwoods and the sound of children playing again in the neighborhood. James noticed things he hadn't before: the tilt of a father's head when listening to his kid's story, the nervous way some children looked for reassurance after falling off a bike. Familiar things that struck a deep chord. At the garage, business was good, but it was the school's auto club that filled something deeper. Dev began stopping by the shop after hours, asking if he could help with real clients. James agreed, cautiously at first, but soon welcomed the company. They rarely talked about personal things, but there was a growing understanding between them, an unspoken bond formed from time and repetition. One Tuesday afternoon, while rotating tires on a dusty pickup, Dev finally asked, "You got kids?" James hesitated. The wrench in his hand felt heavier than usual. "Had a son," he replied. "Haven't seen him in a long while." Dev didn't pry, just gave a slow, respectful nod. "For what it's worth, I think you would have made a pretty good dad." The compliment landed softly but stayed with him for days. By summer, James had rebuilt more than carburetors. He had repaired a rhythm to his days: mornings in the garden, afternoons in the garage, and evenings at the school's workshop. Dev came by regularly, sometimes just to sit on the tailgate and talk about engine mods or music. Still, a dull ache remained, a waiting. Every time the phone rang, and even spam calls, his breath would catch just for a second. Every letter in the mailbox stirred a moment of hope. But nothing ever came. No accidental text, no scribbled postcard. Claire had meant it when she said she was done. And Owen. The boy had probably grown taller, his baby fat likely gone, his voice deeper now. Maybe he called someone else Dad. Maybe he didn't remember the nights they spent chasing fireflies in the backyard, or the names of the stars James taught him while they laid on the hood of the truck. These thoughts no longer broke him. They simply settled, like dust on old photographs, always there, always quiet. Late one July evening, after Dev had gone home, James stood in the center of Owen's room. Nothing had changed. Not the books, not the dinosaur pajamas folded at the edge of the bed, not even the faint scent of apple shampoo on the pillow. He took a deep breath. then turned off the light and gently closed the door. He would keep the room just as it was, not out of grief but out of honor, a quiet museum of a love that was real, a truth no legal document could erase. 3 years passed. Time, that slow and merciless current, moved on even if James hadn't meant to float with it. Hair greyed at the temples. The lines around his eyes deepened, not from age alone but from looking back too often. Lexington changed too. New neighbors, new shops, even a new mayor. But some things stayed the same. The way the trees behind. The house turned amber in October, the squeak of the back porch step, and the silence in Owen's bedroom. The notebook, the one filled with letters to a boy who would never read them, had grown thick, nearly full now. He wrote in it, less often these days, only when the ache became too loud to carry quietly. He had tried everything. Every legal option. Mediation, appeals, family court reviews. He hired 2 lawyers, paid for a private investigator to confirm Claire really had moved again, this time to Vermont. No address, of course, just a town name and a rumor that she had remarried. He never showed up there. He could have driven through the night and knocked on every door until someone recognized her name. But what then? Would it make Owen's life better? Would it heal anything? Or just open an old wound in a child who'd already been taught to forget him? There was dignity in letting go. He learned that slowly, like learning how to live with a limp. Dev left town after graduation, got accepted to a community college in Tennessee, then transferred to a 4-year university with a full ride in engineering. They kept in touch. Dev called every other month or so, usually with questions about cars or life. One day Dev said something James never forgot. "You didn't fail," he said during one of those late-night calls. "You just weren't allowed to win." It hit harder than expected, because he had failed, in the courts, in the fight, in reaching his son, but not in love, not in effort, not in who he chose to be in the aftermath. And that mattered. By his 50th birthday, James had sold the garage, kept a small portion of the property, and converted it into a quiet workspace, where he restored vintage cars for collectors who found him through word of mouth. It wasn't busy, but it was honest. Owen would have been 12 now. One Sunday, James sat by the ridge again, the one overlooking the valley, a little grayer, a little slower, the same folding chair beneath him. Wind pulled gently at the brim of his old cap. He opened the notebook one last time. This final letter was different. "I hope you are happy, son. I hope your life is full of kindness, even if I'm not in it. I tried. I tried in every way I knew. How the truth is, I never stopped loving you, not even for a second. That love, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about showing up every day, even when I wasn't allowed to be seen. I was there in every quiet moment, holding the memory of you like a light I wouldn't let go out. If this is goodbye, then let it be a quiet one. Let it be one that carries no bitterness, just a deep, steady love, the kind that endures even when no one's looking." James folded the page carefully, then tucked the notebook beneath a stone near the edge of the ridge. Not to be found. Not for drama, but for closure. He didn't cry, not anymore. Some wounds stopped bleeding long before they stopped hurting. That night he lit a fire in the backyard, watched the flames reach for the stars like unanswered questions. Then he went to bed, and for the first time in a very long time he slept soundly. He would never see Owen again, but he had nothing left unsaid, and that, in a world that so often steals the chance to say goodbye, was its own kind of peace. Years later, a 12-year-old boy sat in the back seat of a car, watching Kentucky's golden hills roll by through a dusty window. He didn't know why the landscape felt familiar. His mother didn't talk much about the past, only that they used to live somewhere nearby. He pressed his forehead against the glass as they passed a ridge overlooking the valley. For a moment, the wind outside shifted the clouds and sunlight spilled across the hills. Something inside him stirred. He didn't know that just beyond those trees, under a smooth stone, rested a notebook filled with love letters written to him. Letters from a father he no longer remembered, but the love remained, invisible, unseen, enduring. And if this story moved you, help us share it with the world. Like the video to support the project. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more. Take care. And it's important to know this is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to actual events, persons, or locations is purely coincidental.